Hello, this is the History Revision podcast for John Major's government. Let's have a look at politics to start off with. We had a sudden rise to power because of Margaret Thatcher's way she left government, and he was known as Honest John. Unlike Thatcher, he wasn't inspiring or abrasive, but this was part of his attraction. He's personally likeable. The grey-spitting puppet image of a dull man consumed with small details was the public perception of him. He kept Kinnock and Ashdown informed on the Gulf War, which won him lots of respect. He made little attempt to change Thatcher's policies, knowing that an election was imminent. He wanted to build a country that was at ease with itself, which is a hint of criticism of Thatcher, and he wanted to unite the party. Poll tax was quietly withdrawn in 1991, although it's been estimated that up to £1.5 billion was wasted on it. He introduced a 1991 Citizen Charter, which was a watered down version of Thatcherism really. The 1992 election, it was assumed that the Conservatives would lose. Labour assumed it would win. The Sheffield Rally, being an American style triumphalist party, didn't help them. Labour wanted to tax and spend though still, and Major in contrast stood to the Sheffield Rally, stood on a soapbox, literally, and suggested that the Conservatives could run the economy better. The dark days of Labour were still too close, and the loony left was still too fresh in people's imaginations. The Conservatives ran a good campaign, and the Sun switched to supporting the Conservatives. They portrayed Kinnock as an untrustworthy and incompetent, which gave a late swing to the Conservatives, and the headline was the Sun what won it. There had been signs of recovery in the economy, and Major lost ground on what Thatcher had in 1987, but still won with a workable majority of 21. After 92, the Euro rebels defeated a key bill to put the Maastricht Treaty into effect. Major pushed it through though as part of a vote of confidence in the government, forcing the rebels to either accept it or bring down the government. And as these Euro rebels were Conservatives, obviously they didn't want to do that. A proposed referendum on Europe was declared unconstitutional, but it was mainly because they knew they would lose. Meanwhile, Smith took over from Kinnock in 1992. The Conservatives had some local and European and by-election disasters in 1993. By 1995 they were wiped out in local councils. They introduced unpopular tax increases like VAT on fuel, and this was hypocritical after criticising Labour in 1992 election. Major called the opposition from within his own cabinet bastards, and he never had the full support of his cabinet and party. In 1995, Major called a leadership election, which he easily won against John Redwood, to end the backstabbing, but it backfired as over 100 MPs didn't support him. It made him look weak. Major also said we needed to get back to basics, self-discipline and a respect for the law, as well as consideration for others, and the sexual scandals amongst leading Conservatives, what is known as sleaze, came back to haunt him over this back to basics statement. It surpassed the sleaze of Macmillan's time in the early 60s with the Profumo affair, and some of the examples were 1992, Mellor and his affair with a Spanish actress in his Chelsea football kit, and he had to resign. In 1994, Tim Yao had a love child and he had to resign. In 1994 as well, Stephen Milligan died in an autoerotic strangulation episode. Also in 1994 there was the Cash for Questions scandal, where Neil Hamilton was paid by Mohammed Al-Fayed. But you could also argue that the rejection of the Conservative Party in 1997 was as much a rejection of Thatcher as well as the Conservatives in the meantime. In foreign policy, Major made an impressive debut in the Gulf War. He was very statesmanlike. In the Balkan Civil War, the breakup of communist Yugoslavia led to bitter infighting between nationalist and religious and ethnic groups, and in 1992 Major hosted a joint EU and UN conference in London, and a UN peacekeeping force was put in place. However, British and European mediation was seen as ineffectual, especially after the massacre in Srebrenica. Foreign Secretary Douglas Hurd had annoyed the USA by declining support from NATO, as he believed it would prolong the struggle. Eventually, a NATO operation Deliberate Force brought the Serbs to the negotiating table, and the Dayton Agreement was signed in 1995. The warring parties were to keep to designated areas overseen by NATO and the UN. Major was one of the signatories, and this guaranteed Bosnian independence. Hurd's commercial links, if not more, with Serbia were given as a reason for his slowness to move, and the government suffered further sleaze allegations. In the economy, Major inherited a recession, but as Chancellor was partly responsible for it, following the Lawson boom. Decline in manufacturing output happened, and there were high interest rates. Between 91 and 92, unemployment rose from 1.6 to 2.6 million. The collapse of the housing market left many with negative equity, and this affected Tory middle classes as much as anyone. Major resorted to high public spending, and there were recovery signs before the 1992 election. The pound had joined the euro, or the ERM, unrealistically high, so the British exports were too expensive. International bankers suspected this and began to speculate against it, causing a run on the pound, and the pound fell rapidly. We had to keep it within the margins of the ERM, but had to increase interest rates 15% and sold £30 billion of British foreign reserves to prop up sterling, and that didn't work. On Black Wednesday, the 16th of 11th 92, we withdrew from the ERM. This was humiliating, and Britain being part of a single currency was less likely. The Eurosceptic argument was stronger, and the split in the party over Europe became larger. The Conservative reputation for economic expertise was ruined, and Major's authority as Prime Minister was undermined. The longer-term economic effects were less disastrous, and some people even called it White Wednesday, because it meant that we were free from artificial constraints, and the pound became stronger, as did British economy overall. But none of these things were to actually benefit Major, politically anyway. By 1997, unemployment was falling and below 1 million, and it has been said that Major lost an election in a time of boom and won one in a time of slump. In Europe, Major had good relationships with Helmut Kohl. Now, the French wanted to control unified Germany through the currency, the EMU, European Monetary Union, and Eastern countries had now been included in the Union. The Maastricht Treaty showed Major was different to Thatcher in Europe. He was a good European. He signed the Maastricht Treaty in 1992, which meant full European integration, a common European foreign policy and defence policy, because Clinton had took troops out of Europe after the end of the Cold War. It meant a European central bank and a single European currency to be adopted in 1999, although Britain had an opt-out clause negotiated by Major. The EC became the EU, and it was a personal triumph for Major, says Rowe. The treaty was to come into effect in 1993, and Major put Britain at the heart of Europe, and it was intergovernmental rather than supranational, which was in Major's favour, because nobody in Britain wanted a supranational Europe. Major opted out of the social chapter as well, and these opt-outs on the social chapter and single currency won over most doubters in the Conservative Party, says Rowe. Now, maybe we're looking towards Europe because after the Cold War we were less needed by America, but the Eurosceptics saw this Maastricht as their last chance to stop it, and Thatcher herself became even more Eurosceptic from the sidelines. Major had a crisis in persuading Parliament to ratify it. The loss of sovereignty was a problem, although he did force it through. Major obtained the agreement of Europe on subsidiarity, that states should be able to bypass European decisions in matters special to those states. By 1994, Major had expelled Euro rebels from the party, but the press became even more Eurosceptic, including The Sun. Let's have a look at some historical interpretation now. John Keegan says that Major's was one of the dreariest administrations of the century. Norman Lamont, who was Chancellor at the time of Black Wednesday, said, "I know of no single benefit which has come to Britain solely because of its membership of Europe." Some thought earlier entry into the ERM would have meant the pound going in at a more credible level. Derek Murphy says Europe was one way for attacking Major for winning the 1990 leadership election, and Major believed that Black Wednesday was the reason why he lost in 1997. He said that was the end. There was never any hope after that. That's it for Major administration. We're going to have a look at the rise of Labour next time. Bye bye.